like Hamas, the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, the same?
Well, in principle, they may look being the same. In Afghanistan, the international campaign aimed at dismantling the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. But the difference is that in Afghanistan, you had a Northern Alliance, which was part of the campaign. While Israel's campaign against Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which seems to be a campaign against terrorists, is in fact also a military campaign to dismantle the PA as a way to stop Mr. Arafat from achieving his goals via Hamas and Islamic Jihad.
But let's talk.
They do overlap, they're not the same.
Yeah, but let's talk straight here. The bottom line is that these are organizations that the United States has declared as terrorist organizations. These very same organizations that the Israelis are after. Does that not mean then that we beyond have a vested interest in this, we want to see these groups rooted out as well?
The United States basically has listed those two organizations as terrorists, but at the same time, there is no American-Israeli plan as to how to deal with the situation. And the problem is that the Arab-Israeli conflict oversees this terrorist situation. Israel's plan is to get rid of the military apparatus in the West Bank. The United States' plan today is to focus on wider, more regional objectives. This is why, as I said, it may overlap, but it's not the same thing yet.
All right, so what about the possibility that we could see suicide bombings here in the U.S.? President Bush and Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld both urged Arab governments and Muslim leaders to condemn the attacks today.
It's essential for the peace of the region and the world that, that we rout out terrorist activities, that we condemn those activities. Suicide bombers in the name of religion is simple terror.
Murderers are not martyrs. Targeting civilians is immoral, or whatever the excuse.
And in Malaysia today, at a meeting of Islamic officials, some support for the U.S. position from Malaysia's Prime Minister.
If the attack is against civilians, then they must be considered as terrorists.
But the Palestinian Foreign Minister disagreed.
It's not necessary to condemn the suicide bombing because we have to take into considerations the reasons behind somebody to lose his life.
Do we really have to take into consideration the reasons? Let's ask Ramsey Abdallah. I introduced him before. Mr. Abdallah, you know, can you say unequivocally, without a but, without a qualification, that suicide bombings are wrong and should be condemned?
Suicide bombings are wrong, and we have condemned them in the past many times. However, hardly anybody pays attention or listens to this. However, I do agree that we have to analyze and understand why these occur.
So we can't just say suicide bombings are wrong unequivocally, they're bad, they're the wrong way to go about doing this, without looking further.
You can say it if equivalently you're going to say that what the IDF is performing against.
No. I'm saying if you're making a moral differentiation, you're saying suicide bombing is so much worse than anything else. It's so much more of a threat to society, to the world, that we're going to say we're not going to look beyond this. We're going to say, you want to have a discussion about what's happening in Israel, fair enough. It's a fair discussion to have, and it's a discussion that needs to be had. But it should be a separate one, I think, than a discussion about suicide bombings. I think that the Palestinians should all be saying suicide bombings are horrible, they're awful, they should be condemned, and yet they're referred to as martyrs.
As I have said, previously leaders have condemned it. Yasser Arafat himself has condemned it numerous amounts of times.
But then in Arabic he calls them martyrs.
Not at all. He refers to it as a condemned act. He says he understands why it happens. He condemns them, and he has proposed this to the whole entire world. On the other hand, not the whole entire world understands that he has absolutely no control over people's outraged feelings against what is occurring.
He has no control? I mean, that's the part that I'm not sure a lot of, even the American government believes. I think the American government is convinced. If Arafat says in Arabic, hey, cut it off, stop it, it will stop.
Well, here's a situation I'm going to pose to you, and you give me your feelings on this. You have people that need a lot of land the size of New Jersey. However, you can find them to a lot of land that is half the size of Essex County. You tell them this is where you're going to live, this is all that you're getting as land. These people are living in poverty, on top of all that, they are getting beaten.
But let me read you a quote from Thomas Friedman from the New York Times. I know you read this piece from Sunday.
Yes.
He says, quote, Palestinians have adopted suicide bombing as a strategic choice, not out of desperation. This threatens all civilization because if suicide bombing is allowed to work in Israel, it will eventually lead to a bomber strapped with a nuclear weapon threatening entire nations.
That is absolutely preposterous as far as I'm concerned, because if you are to believe that it's not out of desperation, that is speculation. You do not see what these people have to face, what kind of living conditions they have to go through every day, dealing with occupation and dealing with these people that are coming in and raping and pillaging their homes and their land.
Well, I don't think there's no allegation that they're being raped, right? When you say raped, you mean in terms of taking?
Yes,
right,
sir.
Okay, understood. Walid Pharez, what do you make of Tom Friedman's statement, as well as the possibility of suicide bombings coming to the United States?
Well, first of all, I agree with Tom's premise, that is, at least half of it, that there is a strategy to use the suicide bombing, the istishhad, as we say in Arabic, as a way to achieve a political goal. If it wasn't, then it wouldn't be considered by many organizations in the Middle East.
But is it this much of a threat? Is it a threat to the United States and to civilization?
Well, it is a threat to whomever the jihadist movement would choose to target at the end of the day. And I would take into consideration, and very seriously, the statements made by Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda organization back in the fall when they ordered suicide attacks against the United States. Now, practically, would that happen? Do they have capabilities? Nobody knew before September the 11th.
I would like to interrupt really quickly, if I may. The comparison between America and between the issue that is occurring in Palestine is completely ridiculously absurd. There is no kind of comparison to be made there between New York and between what happens every day in Palestine or in Israeli territory.
In both cases, you have people taking their own lives for what they view as a cause and killing innocent civilians.
However, those people that were in New York didn't occupy lands. They did not go and take over lands. They did not build settlements in lands. They did not break the Oslo Accord and the Oslo treaties, as had been mentioned previously many a times. They were innocent souls. They were attacked from terrorist organizations that were outside of...
I think the argument goes, and I know that the Israeli argument would certainly be, in both cases you have innocence. In both cases you're talking about people who were women and children and people sitting in cafes and sitting in the World Trade Center. And they just simply were, their lives were lost because some jerk, and that's an understatement, decides to commit some sort of suicide attack.
Well, that jerk might have, as you say, he might have committed that attack after having another jerk on the Israeli Defense Forces side commit a crime. It's just never a defense.
I'm sorry. I just think, and we started this conversation this way, and I have to say that I think that it's time the Palestinians, leaders like yourself, came out and said it is never okay for suicide bombings, ever.
Okay, well, in lieu of having one of us go and say that, and we have in the past many
And you're saying it right now?
And I am saying it right now. I condemn them. However...
But that's it. Why, however? Why not just end it there and say, you know what, and then we'll get into a discussion about Israel.
There's always two sides to the coin.
But
there is never one side to the coin.
Why isn't there one side? Why isn't the one side on this that suicide bombings are so horrible and so awful that that's the end of the discussion?
Because there are greater crimes than suicide bombings that are being occurred. Yes.
All right, fair enough. That's the argument. I guess that's the argument to be made. I don't think that the United States buys it. I don't buy it. Walid Pharez, do you buy it? Very quickly. We're done. I mean, we're running out of time.
Dan, resistance doesn't warrant suicide attacks against civilians. Otherwise, the Bosnians would have blew up buildings in Serbia. The Kurds would have blew up buildings in Baghdad. The Lebanese under Syrian occupation would have done the same. Why is it uniquely that Hamas and Islamic...
Walid Pharez, Ramsey Abdallah, this is an interesting conversation that needs to be had, and I appreciate both of you coming on the program.
Thank you very much.
Up next, what's believed to be the biggest capture yet in the war on terrorism, Al-Qaeda's director of admissions, Abu